Hi everyone. So you may have just seen, or we're about to see our latest film screening in the Lehigh Valley LGBTQ plus film series, and we have a very special guest now, filmmaker, documentary filmmaker, and director of the piece, Vivian Kleiman. Vivian, thank you so much for being here. This is before the screening, but thank you so much for your time now.
I'm very happy to have this opportunity to talk with you.
Thank you so much. So I'm here, Kathy's here as well. Zoom does that weird thing where we're in speaker view, but it is us talking with Vivian right now, and we just wanted to kind of touch base over five somewhat topics over the screening that we decided to pick for this film series. Again, we do this to amplify queer voices and stories and all of the beautiful ends of different spectrums and identities within the LGBTQIA plus community. So let's just dive right in about the film. So Vivian, could you maybe give us, now keep in mind, audience members probably just saw this, in your minds, like how would you give a brief overview of No Straight Lines and what inspired you to make this film?
Well, No Straight Lines is a collection of stories about five artists who came of age as gay or queer comic book writers and artists at a time of profound change in our country. And my goal in doing it, just in brief, was really to reach young queers in this country in particular, who I feel like need some role models about people in the past, elders in our community who have faced struggles and address them head on.
Could you maybe go into a little bit about how you decided and how you chose the specific artists and stories that were featured in the film?
I'm actually the least qualified person to do a documentary about comic books because I'm not a comic book devotee. I was approached by two friends who had started the project and wanted a filmmaker to take it on. Um, I initially declined. I said, well, Alison Bechdel really, was important to me, but other than that, I'm not really a comic books fan in particular. And then Justin Hall, one of those two people, encouraged me to attend the world's first international conference in gathering of queer comic book artists. It took place in New York City a couple of years ago, and I attended. And when I walked into that conference hall room, the opening lobby, I was astonished by what I saw. It was like every flavor, size, color, age of being queer, LGBTQ plus was not just brought together, but really engaged with one another. I walked in and I saw this one person who had chartreuse dyed hair, her body, and every body part was covered with tats, totally engaged in conversation with an older gentleman, balding head, paunched stomach, wrinkled Ivy League collared shirt, and around them, like all these different kinds of queer folks engaged in conversation. And over the next few days, I heard their stories and I saw their work, and I went, wow, this is a casting director's dream. And it really challenged the notion of uh, the separation amongst the difference in the LGBTQIA plus community, and how this is a unique world where we come together. And I wanted to amplify that.
So you're saying now, you've kind of alluded to the whole, like, I wasn't the right person because of your background knowledge with this genre. So what were some of the biggest challenges you faced while creating this documentary?
The actual biggest challenge was in narrowing down the selection, because unlike many films that I've been a part of, we usually are squeezing the resources for images because we like to tell stories not just with words but also with images, much like comics. Um, but in this case, there was a plethora, an inundation, a tsunami of images and talented people to profile. And so the huge challenge was, but as a filmmaker, I refuse to have it be an encyclopedia of who did what when. Books are great for that. The internet is great for that. I'm not needed for that. I'm needed for something that synthesizes the details and tries to elevate or tickle out the significance of what has of the events and of the changes that have occurred. And so to that degree, it was truly a challenge to usually I would have narrowed it down to three artists, famous three. We couldn't. It was absolutely impossible. So I gave in, and it was 5 artists that we profile. And then even after that, I still found it obligatory to sprinkle in young voices, the voices of young artists throughout, because I just couldn't stop with those 5 artists. So in this case, it's really like an amazing plethora of talent and images that I wanted to include.
To provide some context, so Adriana, Kathy, and I kind of work on this big database of spreadsheets. We love a good spreadsheet where we're like, what stories do we
Yeah.
want to amplify? What pieces of film are we really excited about? And I'm pretty sure all three of us were really passionate about this specific piece. And we have a little section where we add our notes. Mine was in big capital letters, Alison Bechdel, duh. That was a book that actually I come from a musical theater background. So when the show Fun Home came out too, and it was performing in the Tonys in 2015 and it won, that actually got me to read the book, and that was my first ever experience with, I think the genre is tragicomic, right? It's a comic book, but there's tragedy. It's a memoir. Obviously,
Yeah.
there's illustrations. It's a comic, but that was kind of like not it was definitely life changing for me because I had never really ingested any type of media in that and I love to read. I love audiobooks, but I was like, oh my gosh, this is new. And from there I actually realized that there were a few other pieces of like either realistic fiction or memoirs that kind of followed suit with that. But to see that in the format of like a queer story was so impactful for me. And so just to see that there was an entire film kind of amplifying people of this identity in this field was really remarkable. So one, thank you, and then two, just kind of going back a little bit into queer comics. Do you think there are any common misconceptions with queer comics in general, or just like this idea that you hope that the film addresses?
I think that all too often the stereotype of comics is for not for the younger generation, but for those over 30 plus. The stereotype is that comic books is like cotton candy, not significant, it's kid stuff. And that's one thing that one idea that I was eager to debunk. And the other is that comic books are only about the frivolous, it's just entertainment. It's about monsters and outer space figures and stories and violence and oh, then there's Superman and heroes galore. And the thing that's really remarkable about queer comics is how they reflect my life and our lives as queer people. And that astonished me. And it's so different from the content of Marvel comics, for example. And people like Alison Bechdel, Howard Cruz, Rupert Kennard are telling uh, stories that are both humorous and also poignant, but are rooted in our lives with the idea being that they wanted to they wanted to make our lives visible. And so the whole notion, the whole impetus behind this group of queer comic book artists was really to tell our stories and how powerful that process became for all of us. I myself, as I said earlier, I would see Alison Bechdel's Likes to Watch Out For, was serialized in the, local feminist newspaper. And we would all wait with bated breath for the next installment because it was either a story about, political dyke going to the, war, the demonstration against the war in Washington, D.C., or having a crush on somebody that you saw at the bookstore. Or it could be like the lesbians in finance who are having a barbecue with their fancy outfits. It's the whole panoply of who we are. And I think that that's what really captured me.
Thank you so much. Kathy, do you want to take it away with the next set of questions?
Sure. And it's kind of a follow-up to that. Can you discuss the significance of how queer comics provided representation and a voice for the marginalized community? I think of, Jennifer Camper from this movie, but just in general.
Definitely. What's really curious about your question about marginalized communities is that queer comic book artists were marginalized within the underground comic scene. So the underground comic scene came to be especially in the mid 60s, very vibrant, but it wasn't cool to be queer. In fact, it was very much scary, and one was very much
Mm.
concerned about your profession, about your day job, because you weren't making any money from drawing comics. You were concerned about being rejected by your family, your friends, your religious community, whatever it was. And so queer comic book artists were marginalized within the underground marginalized world. And I find that layering to be so complicated. And from there emerged the notion of, well, we're not getting accepted in mainstream. We're not getting accepted in the underground comics. So we'll just open up our voices and do whatever the hell we want and find our audience somehow. This is way before internet. And so it began with little single, cell joke comic, gag comics, as it were. Allison was doing them, Howard. And then they found, as I alluded, they found a home in the flourishing queer newspaper world across the US and beyond. And I think it was that notion of being marginalized that really infused the work with this authentic voice and a sense of, we can say anything we want because no holds barred. We're not beholden to anybody. We have no paycheck, and so they were free. There was a freedom. And I think that that's freedom that was felt among the queer cartoonists is something that I also aspire to give a nod to for other marginalized groups today, be it the disability community or people of color.
And this kind of then takes me to, how have you seen the queer comic, area evolve over the years? And what role do you think they've played in LGBTQ plus history?
Well, yeah, I think well, for many of us in the 80s, 90s, it was an essential life support system, to be honest. And that has evolved as the folks either who will be watching the film or have watched it, over the 4 decades the film covers. Artists evolve both in terms of their command of the tools and the language of drawing. Alison Bechtel, for example, speaks to how she learned cross-hatching, more refined cross-hatching from her mentor, Howard Cruz, and so on and so forth. And until finally, Allison's her landmark work, Fun Home, appears on Time magazine cover as Book of the Year in 2006. Mainstream acceptance happens, and so it's kind of like starting out from Mary Wing saying, I just picked up, I was tired of seeing straight people draw us. I wanted to tell the real story. So she threw herself on the couch, grabbed a pen and just started drawing. And I hope that spirit really reaches out to everybody. And it goes from that sense of, oh, heck, I'll just do it myself, DIY kind of an impetus, to now there's this whole industry. You can get a master's degree in comics at an art school here in the Bay Area. And it has really flourished as in terms of the gravitas that's given to the medium and the art. And we also have, for example, web comics now, queer web comics that are just mind-blowing. In fact, mind-blowing because there's so many, and also because there's so many different genres of queer web comics. For example, now you have sci-fi and the fuzzy animals in a way that we didn't have before, and everything in between. And I like to quote Jen Camper, who in one interview we were doing said, she really loves it that now there's so many queer web cartoonists and print that she has the freedom now to reject certain genres that she doesn't like. Whereas before they're all supportive of one another and eager and encouraging one another to, for self-expression. So real things have really changed enormously in the field.
So, that brings me to a question too that you highlighted in the movie, which is the historical aspect to it, where during the time of the comics that we're talking about, it was 70s, 80s, and there was a lot of LGBTQ discrimination and challenges to rights. And then you had the AIDS epidemic also. And I was just wondering how you balance providing that historical perspective within the narrative of the actual comics, because it must have been really interesting to look at it.
You'd make my life easier if you asked easy questions. That was a challenge because, as I alluded to earlier, I didn't want to just simply tell who did what when kind of history. And in fact, the film is not even, it's a history of queer comics and artists, but it's not told chronologically. And my desire was to create something to be not to like exaggerate my what I've done, but something that was more akin to a novel that takes you on an emotional trajectory rather than a straight ahead chronology of who did what when. Um, how one accomplishes that, honestly, takes a lot of time, unless you're a genius, which I'm not. But it takes a lot of time in the edit room just to sit with the different elements. You start by building little stories, and then you show it to your friends, and they say you stitch them together, and your friends say, "Oh, this is really boring. Why are you wasting your time?" And
Mm.
then you go back to your edit room and you go, I got to convince them. And really, it's a matter of trial and error and trial and error and a lot of experience, I guess, in storytelling and how far astray you can go from the main subject before you've completely lost your viewer. And um, that's a delicate balance to figure out. That's just, to be honest, the school of trial and error. I will say one thing added to that, which is just because I want to make sure we get this in. I was committed to only telling the story, only including 5 artists in the film and nobody else. And then I showed when I watched the rough cut at one point, it just felt kind of flat. It felt like it was just telling history. Yes, it wasn't just linear, but it was just telling the history, and didn't feel alive. And I did an experiment one day. It was a little crazy. It's the kind of thing you can do as an independent filmmaker. Because if I were under the thumb of some kind of institutional entity that was paying for this, they wouldn't have allowed me to play because it's expensive to film for a day. But I did an experiment of filming at one of the next international ingatherings of queers and comics conference. And we grabbed a few young people. I didn't know them. I didn't know who they were. I didn't know their work. I had them for literally on the clock 10 minutes. Hi, my name's Viv. Who are you? And out of the speed interviews came a sprinkling of what I call the Greek chorus in the film, commentary from young
Mm.
people, young queer people, artists, talking about the impact of the work of Alison Bechdel and Howard Cruz and Rupert Kennard. And when I showed these little sprinklings, when I showed the rough cut that was sprinkled that included these young people, and I showed it to people who were over the age of like 45, 50, they thought I was crazy. They said, no, you can't just throw in, these people and not show me their work and tell me where they live and what they're doing and what they're about. I need to know more about them. And then I showed it to people who were under 30, like no more than like 25. What do you think? And they go like, why are you asking me that? Of course it's fine. They're great. There's no problem. So I knew that my audience was
Yeah.
for young people. And I kept that in mind as we finished the film. And luckily, the story came together in a way that seems to have reached a much broader audience in the end.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that. You were talking a little bit about web comics and how things have definitely shifted, and there totally is an impact. But could you speak a little bit about how you believe personally that they will continue to influence pop culture, the industry, or just folks with queer identities just in general? Like what you feel these trends are going to kind of like lead into?
I have to respond by stepping back to a little bit of a bigger picture, if you don't mind, which is to say that many of us felt like we have arrived in terms of gaining rights and recognition for LGBTQ folks. We have all these laws that were passed to protect us in the workplace, gay marriage, those kinds of things. And we can just kind of rest on our laurels. And yet at the same time, there's like this whiplash over the last few years of seeing a lot of those rights being rescinded. And I kind of feel like at the same time, it's a complicated moment. At the same time, there's, as I said, a huge, outpouring of creative work, both in terms of queer artists, young queer artists, and other marginalized groups. And so the medium has become even more accessible than the pen and paper from before. Not more accessible, I would say you can reach a much bigger audience. And I think reaching the bigger audience is the part that's really important. So for example, No Straight Lines was shown, they tried to show No Straight Lines to at a queer arts festival in St. Petersburg, Russia, a couple of years ago. And, the laws in Russia turned more severe in those few months in between scheduling. They had to screen the work through a VPN, one of those ways you can screen media without tracing the origin and the viewer. And it was a VPN in Ukraine. And the Q&A had to be done very surreptitiously. And yet it happened. And we're finding ways, there's like a thirst for our voices, there's a thirst for our representation, and there's a huge way now of reaching people through the internet. And so I find it to be a very exciting time and a very validating moment. And I can't wait for young queers to vote in November and change, make a change in the landscape or the legislative landscape in this country.
So you were talking a little bit more about what people can do, and that's all about action, which is great. Do you have any thoughts on how maybe fans and supporters, young voices, just people in general, how they can continue to support this type of visibility, and how impactful and important it is to queer stories and narratives, directly to these queer comics and queer creators? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I love that question, which gave me the opportunity to encourage people to support artists. We all think that we can get, myself included, we expect to be able to sit down, flop on the couch and watch anything for free anytime. And the problem with independent filmmaking is that it costs us our lives, really. Most of us don't get paid for our work. We do it because we're definitely crazy, because we love doing it, and all of our resources that we can gather together go into creating our work. So I would say support your local artists to whatever extent, or your favorite artists to whatever extent possible. Um, get on one of those monthly, Patreon kind of things, or go out and buy the comic books, or whatever you can do to support artists would be awesome. And I would say also feel free to do your own work and express yourself. You'd be amazed at how fun it is.
So what's next for you? Are you working on anything right now? Any projects? Any areas of interest? New areas of interest? Anything like that you have going on?
Yeah, in fact, part of what I'm doing right now, actually, mostly I'm finishing up a series of short videos that designed for distribution on social media. It's called Out the Vote. And guess what? I'm trying to encourage young queers to go out and vote. And it's interviews with about a dozen different kinds of queer folks in different parts of the country, most especially swing states, some of them in rural areas, Texas, rural Michigan and beyond. And all of them acknowledging that sometimes it's hard to make a choice in a mostly two-party system, but talking about the reasons why it's important to go out and vote in November, both to vote for the presidential election, but also down ballot as well.
When it comes to comics and just what's happening in our environment, it was interesting to me to see that the number one banned book is actually a comic, quote unquote, novel book, genderqueer. So it's the number one, but then at the same time, Vivian, it was also then the number one purchased book after that. And I was just curious to know what you thought of how the attention on a comic novel was like the biggest challenge, and then people then became active in supporting, the community.
I'm so glad you asked that because first of all, I didn't know that it became one of the best-selling of books, but doesn't
Mhm.
surprise me. If you tell young people not to read something, they're going to run out and find it. Um,
Yeah.
I have to say that genderqueer, the creator of genderqueer, Maya Kobabe, was one of those dozen people that I grabbed in that to interview in that first Queers and Comics conference. I didn't know who she was, or sorry, I didn't know who they
Mhm.
were. And uh, it's just incredible what has happened with, I mean, that genderqueer is an incredible, it's not really a novel, it's a autobiography, really. And
Right.
it's I think it's described as a memoir, graphic memoir. Um, the power of
Right.
that, just another example of the power of telling your own story and how frightened, you know, the old guard is with these stories and of who we are. And if these stories weren't impactful, they would have no reason to ban the books and ban drag and do all the censorship that we are now experiencing in different parts of the country. So I hope that and by the way, in the film, there's other books that have been banned. Alison Bechdel's work has been banned. Art Spiegelman's work has been banned, and there's a few others who I
Mhm.
forget right now. But if it wasn't impactful, they wouldn't waste their time trying to ban the work.
Very well said. Thank you so much, Vivian. If folks out watching this want to connect more with you and what you have going on, do you have a website or anything you'd like to promote?
Yeah, actually, it would be great for them to go to viviankleiman.com, Kleiman. But also, I should add that if they want to have their friends uh, watch No Straight Lines, that they're not available in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and other parts of the country, if they go to the No Straight Lines, the film website, we try to post screenings there. I have to say recently that's been a little outdated, but I will make an effort to update the website. And I just want to say how grateful I am to the work that you're doing because it's one thing for us to walk over hot coals to make this work, but if we didn't have the exhibitors and curators and programmers like yourselves, we would not be able to have our work reach our intended audience. So I'm hugely grateful for the work that you're doing.
We're grateful to you. Thank you so much for joining us,
Yep.
Vivian.
Our
Kathy,
pleasure.
anything you'd like to say before I end this?
No, thank you again so much, Vivian. Appreciate your work and your insights. And I look forward to seeing what else you have down the road. So
Thank you.
thank you again.